Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Wallsend history story. This week is another video in the Wallsend area pubs series. However, unlike the others, this one just covers one pub rather than three. I decided to do it like this because the pub in question had quite a lot of information attached to it from its initial opening, and I felt it would make the video a bit too long if I included it in with others. So here it is all by itself. The pub I am covering is the Rising Sun on the Coast Road, originally known as the Rising Sun Hotel. First built and opened in 1938 and named after the close by Rising Sun Colliery. I did find one source which suggested that the pub was opened at the end of May in 1938. However, according to the news reports of the time, it actually opened on Friday, June the 3rd. But to be fair, it is only a few days difference with the dates. There was a fabulous write-up about the opening in one of the local Sunday papers, with quite a lot of information about the newly built hotel. So here is my version of the information from that article. The Rising Sun Hotel was described at the time as being a rather imposing building on the landscape of the Coast Road. This, of course, would have been the old Coast Road, not the one we know today. The building was also called a roadhouse in the article, which did amuse me a little, as roadhouse always makes me think of the film and not a pub in Wallsend. But of course, roadhouse just means a pub or an inn by the side of the road, usually designed to offer refreshments and accommodation if needed for those passing by car. I nearly forgot to say that a little bit. And that was exactly why the Rising Sun Hotel had been built, though I have to admit to wondering how many passing it would have been in need of accommodation, as it's not really like a motorway hotel, but the owners must have felt that it was very much needed. The pub had been purpose-built for the owners Calders of Newcastle upon Tyne, from the plans of the architects Hetherington and Wilson, also of Newcastle, and the actual builders were R.W. Bell and Company, and again they were from Newcastle. They also had a little help from other companies who supplied things like windows, fireplaces, carpets, the general decoration and electricity, described as a perfect blend of modern and Georgian styles. It was felt that there was no better location than the one which had been chosen. Not only was it an ideal resting place for travellers to call in for refreshments, but it was in an ideal spot to be used by the nearby Kings Road estate and the other surrounding areas. And on top of this, it had very comfortable residential accommodation for those who wanted to stop a little longer. The owners at the time in their own advert described it as being the most beautiful hotel in the district. It was said that those passing on the Coast Road could not fail to see it, with its large illuminated sign, 75-foot frontage and 3 large semicircle bay windows. It has to be said they do make it sound quite impressive from the outside, and to top it off, it had been built with handmade bricks which had been used in the past by people like Richard Granger and John Dobson for, as they put it, famous buildings in Newcastle. And on top of this, it had tall, graceful Georgian-style chimneys at either end of the building, and the roof had been tiled with original Westmoreland slates, apparently the most famous in the world. And these slates had been brought to the site from a South Country mansion, which we have to hope was no longer in use, because otherwise it was missing its roof. So it is true to say that no expense had been spared, though sadly the article doesn't actually tell how much it had cost to build, but it does sound like it would have been quite expensive. The enthusiastic description continued inside the building. On the ground floor, the East Wing, as it was called at the time, was what was also known as the Select Room, easily able to seat up to 100 people. In the central area was the bar, again able to seat up to 100 people, and the west wing was where the sitting room was located, and that was also capable of seating up to 100 people. Behind these, at the back of the building, was the main lounge with room to sit up to 200 people. On the second floor you would find the dining room, not quite as large as the other rooms, but at least 70 people would be able to sit down to eat at any one time. And also on the second floor are the hotel bedrooms. However, the article doesn't state how many of those there actually were, so if anyone listening knows, do please let me know. And finally, this floor also housed the kitchens and the manager's flat or rooms. The whole building was fitted with central heating and a hot water supply. Some of these things were still quite new, so would often be mentioned when describing new buildings to show just how luxurious they were. The decorating had been done by R.J. Richardson Limited, and I have to admit that although it was described as amazing and the best for any roadhouse in the north of England, some of the colour schemes sound awful to me, but of course in the late 1930s it was probably the height of fashion. The best room of all, according to the newspaper article, was apparently the lounge, with an impressive ceiling with a gold and silver colour scheme blended with mauves and pinks, which sounds a little bit over the top to me, but apparently it was truly beautiful, with a luxurious carpet on the floor that your feet sank into. The select room in the east wing was done in a Tudor style with a gold and green ceiling. The dining room was designed with a rising sun in the centre of the ceiling, and the walls were said to mimic the idea of the warmth of the sunshine entering the room. There were around 11 windows at the front of the building, so a lot of natural light would have helped this effect as well, no doubt. The staircases are mahogany woodwork and panelling, and the lights are described as being of the most modern type. But the detail is missing here, so it's a bit hard to imagine what the light fittings would have actually looked like. Going back to the outside, it is said the car park, which is free to use, is capable of holding up to 100 cars, and mention is made of the petrol stations close by. I do doubt for 1 second that the car park today would hold 100 cars, as cars were a lot smaller back in 1938. The Rising Sun Hotel was also designed for the use of cyclists, and it was said that they planned to build a cycle storage area where the bikes could be locked up at the rear of the building to keep them safe overnight. But I sadly have no idea if this was ever built, as I was not able to find a follow-up article about it. Apart from the mention of a few more of the builders who had helped, such as Thompson and Snee, who had provided the windows, and R.W. Smiles, who had done the plastering work, this is basically where the opening description ends. But I hope that it has given you some idea of what the pub was like when it first opened. The article was quite good, but it was lacking in a couple of places. Not only did it not mention the cost to build, it also didn't mention how many attended the opening night, or, and probably more importantly, who the first manager of the Rising Sun was to be. I don't have access to the kind of information that would tell us who the first manager was, so sadly, unless anyone knows, we might never know who they were. What I do know is that from around 1945 until 1952, the manager and manageress were a Mr. and Mrs. J. Harrison, and they were actually leaving in 1952 to take over the running of a hotel in Amble. Sadly, and I did look quite a lot, I wasn't able to find any details about whether or not the pub was successful as a hotel, or whether or not it was used more as a local pub for those who lived close by. I think it would have been quite popular with the locals, as at the time There were no other public houses close to the area where it had been built. And I did find a lot of adverts for barmaids for the pub, but I didn't spot any asking for hotel staff like chambermaids or kitchen porters, etc. Based on the original description, I would say that the exterior of the pub has changed very little over the years, apart from a few paint jobs and the addition of satellite dishes, of course. The surrounding areas have changed quite a lot over the years, and I would imagine that the inside of the pub has changed a lot as well. I thought that I would end this video with a couple of little stories about the pub over the years. Obviously, I have just picked out one or two, otherwise we could be here a long time, as 70 odd years of being open is a lot of stories to tell. The same as many other pubs in Wallsend, it was often used for local events. Things like the first ever meeting for the Wallsend Women's Tea Club, which was held there in 1941. I have no idea what a tea club was, and I am hoping that someone listening will be able to tell me. But in April of 1941, they had a membership of 80 people and a waiting list to join, so it must have been something that was quite popular. Also held in the Rising Sun Hotel was the Women's Club annual Christmas dinner, taking place there in 1949, complete with a scary looking Santa whose photo I sadly can't share with you, but trust me, he would have made me cry if I'd have been plunked on his knee. Another event in 1952, a presentation party for the then manager and manageress. I assume this to be Mr. and Mrs. Harrison, who were leaving that year, didn't quite go according to plan when a disturbance took place and some people were actually asked to leave the pub. And later a lady had her glasses broken when a slight fight broke out outside the pub. The pub was still known as the Rising Sun Hotel into the 90s, and although I haven't been able to find any details of when exactly, the hotel part was later dropped, and it is now known simply as the Rising Sun. I have to admit that I cannot remember ever having gone into this pub. It would have been a little bit out of my way, as I was always mainly on the high street or in Howden when I first started my drinking days in Wallsend. But I am sure that many of you watching and listening will have some good memories of the Rising Sun. So do let me know the things you remember most in the comments below. The Rising Sun is, in 2023, still open and still trading as a public house. It appears to be still quite a popular pub, as most times when I pass it, it looks to be quite busy, which is always good to see. I do hope that you have enjoyed this short little story about some of the history of the Rising Sun. The photos that you have seen have all been taken by me. Some were taken recently and some were taken a few years ago, which is why you will notice a slight difference in the colour scheme at the front of the pub. I thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.